Before we dive into today's story, please take a moment to check out a friend's new channel featuring unforgettable audio stories. You'll find the link in the description box. Give it a look and hit that subscribe button if you enjoy heartfelt storytelling. Now let's begin. I grew up in a family that, by all outward appearances, seemed perfectly ordinary. We weren't rich by any stretch, but life was steady and secure. My dad worked as a technician at a small local firm, and my mom devoted her time to raising me until I turned 10. To everyone passing by, we looked like the ideal American family, but with time, I've come to see the hidden fractures in our home. My father was the quiet sort, a genuine gentleman who always put others first. He wasn't one for flashy behaviors or lively chatter, but he was the rock of our family. No matter how grueling his long hours were, he made sure every bill was paid and that I never lacked anything. Even when buried in work, he'd drop everything if I needed help with a homework problem or if my bike needed a repair. I absolutely adored him. I remember one night struggling through a mountain of math homework until tears threatened to spill. Dad sat beside me at our kitchen table, his face etched with concentration as he examined the problem. "Okay, kiddo," he said, "let's break this down one step at a time." His calm, patient tone made everything seem manageable. I nodded through sniffles as he methodically guided me through each step, never once making me feel foolish for not grasping it right away. When I finally got the right answer, he ruffled my hair and smiled. "I knew you had it in you," he said. My mom was an entirely different force altogether, vibrant, magnetic, and endlessly charming. When she entered a room, people naturally felt drawn to her energy, laughing easily at her jokes and compliments. That was her public face. At home, however, her personality shifted. "Logan, how many times do I have to tell you not to leave your shoes by the door?" she would exclaim, snatching them off the floor and leaving them by the staircase. I'd mutter a quick, "Sorry, Mom," and hastily tidy up, trying to avoid provoking more fuel for her fire. She sighed dramatically and would add, "It's always something with you and your father. I'm the only one keeping this house from falling apart." I learned early not to argue. It was easier simply to nod and retreat into silence. If Dad ever forgot something from the store, or dinner wasn't exactly up to her standards, she wouldn't unleash a tirade. Yet when her words struck, they cut deep. "Logan, if you'd listened the first time, I wouldn't have to repeat myself." I hated that disappointed look in her eyes. It made me feel utterly small and never enough. Back then, I simply chalked it up to her being meticulous. My dad bore her criticisms silently. He never raised his voice or fought back. Instead, he would apologize, fix whatever was wrong, and try to keep the peace. I often wondered if he thought that staying calm would settle her storm of complaints. But it wasn't just spare critiques. There were times when it seemed like she relished the power over him. I recall one evening when she spotted a small stain on the counter near the sink, a remnant of dinner. Dad had been the last to use the kitchen, yet she aimed her frustration squarely at him. "Really? Must I do everything myself?" she grumbled, vigorously scrubbing the spot. "You can't even manage to clean up after yourself, James." Without a word, Dad set aside his newspaper and took over cleaning, softly saying, "Sorry, honey." She huffed, arms crossed. "You always miss things," she muttered. He just nodded, offering a fleeting smile, then resumed his place at the table. I wanted to speak up, but I knew better than to disturb the delicate balance of our troubled home. Things began to shift when I turned 14. For the first time in a long while, Mom got a job as a receptionist at a small law firm. Suddenly, she was animated in a way that astonished me. She would come home bubbling with stories about her coworkers and new projects. "You won't believe what happened today," she'd say one night, setting her purse on the counter. "One of the partners completely forgot a client meeting, and I had to cover for him. He was so grateful, said I saved his skin." Dad, always the supportive husband, smiled warmly while setting the dinner table. "That's great, Linda. I'm really proud of you." Her face lit up. "It feels good to feel useful again, to put my talents to work." Initially, I was happy for her, and Dad was every bit as supportive, asking about her day and praising her for rejoining the workforce. Then the late nights began. At first, she'd work extra hours occasionally, finishing paperwork or attending a work event. "I'll be home late tonight," she'd say one morning, slipping on her heels as she grabbed her keys. Some of us are celebrating a major win at work. Dad never questioned it, smiling gently. Have fun. But gradually, her late returns became the norm. Dinner would be long finished by the time she arrived, sometimes not until after midnight. I noticed the toll it took on Dad. Though he never said anything outright, I would catch him at the kitchen table late at night, staring at his coffee cup with a distant, haunted look. He started staying up, waiting for her return. Yet when she finally walked through the door, their brief exchanges were filled with a tense silence. One night I was startled awake by hushed voices drifting from the kitchen. I sat up, trying to listen. My parents rarely argued, at least not loudly. But that night, the urgency in their whispers sent a knot of dread through me. I don't understand, Linda, Dad said in a tight, low tone. You're hardly ever home anymore. It's like you don't even want to be here. Oh, for God's sake, James, Mom snapped, irritation thick in her voice. I work late because I have to, not to avoid you. A pause ensued before Dad murmured, That's not what I meant. He exhaled slowly, a gesture of weariness that seemed to erase his words. I just feel that something's missing. Something's changed. You've changed. A dismissive scoff followed. So what? I get a job and suddenly I'm the villain? Maybe you're just being paranoid. It's not paranoia, he insisted quietly. It's concern. A chair scraped. Footsteps retreated. I don't have time for this, James, Mom said coldly. Moments later, the bedroom door shut abruptly. The next morning, nothing appeared out of the ordinary. Dad made me scrambled eggs, asking about my day, as if everything was just fine. When Mom finally came downstairs, Dad even leaned over and kissed her cheek before leaving for work. But I saw it in his eyes, a quiet sadness, the way his shoulders drooped, just a little more than usual. Over the coming weeks, things only deteriorated. Mom began dressing differently. She invested in new fashionable clothes, sleek skirts, body-hugging blouses, heels that clicked authoritatively as she walked. Wow, you look different, I remarked one morning as I caught her checking her reflection in the mirror. She adjusted her earring nonchalantly and replied, It's for work. I need to look professional. It just felt like more than the demands of a job. And then there was the phone, a brand new expensive model that she clutched everywhere, as if it contained the secrets of her entire world. I brushed it off at first. After all, I was just a teenager, uninterested in the intricacies of adult lives. But one evening, something happened that I couldn't ignore. Dad unexpectedly came home early from work, a rare occurrence. His face was ashen, his hands gripping a crumpled piece of paper. I was on the couch half watching TV when I saw him. Dad, what's going on? I asked, rising from the couch. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, his gaze locked onto the paper, as if trying to crush it with his fingers. Finally, he exhaled slowly, shaking his head. It's nothing, Logan. Don't worry about it. I frowned. Are you sure? He managed a small, exhausted smile. Yeah, just need to rest, he mumbled before retreating into his bedroom and closing the door behind him. I didn't know then that the paper was the start of our undoing. It was a hotel receipt, something Mom had never mentioned. Dad discovered it while going through our bills, a solitary charge that made no sense. That night, he confronted her privately. Later, as I sat at the kitchen table, Dad recounted everything to me. What did she say? I asked. With a hollow tone, he replied, She admitted it. She said she was seeing someone else. Dad let out a bitter laugh, as if it were the most ordinary confession in the world. I stared at him silently until he added, It's like everything I did for this family wasn't enough. My stomach churned with anger. That's bullshit, I thought. Dad sighed, rubbing his face. Maybe, but nothing can change what's happened. That night marked the beginning of our complete unraveling. It wasn't long before our home transformed into something unrecognizable. One day I came home from school to find Dad sitting forlornly at the kitchen table, clutching a plain white envelope. His gaze was distant, as if the envelope contained the very weight of his shattered spirit. Dad? I asked softly, setting my backpack aside. He startled briefly, then shoved the envelope away, forcing a smile. Hey, kiddo, how was school? He asked. I ignored it and stared. What's wrong? For several long minutes, he remained silent, his fingers drumming and eyes straying back to that forsaken envelope. Finally, in a barely audible whisper, he said, "I don't know how much more I can take." The rawness in his voice sent a chill down my spine. I wanted to push for answers, but the words caught in my throat as I watched the man who had once been my unwavering support slowly crumble before me. That night haunted me for weeks. It was an ordinary evening when I was absorbed in homework, eager for an escape into a video game, when Mom strolled in calmly, glass of wine in hand. Without warning, she dropped a bombshell. "I just need to let you know, I'm seeing someone." I froze, pen hovering above the page, thinking I hadn't heard correctly. I looked up, expecting an explanation, but she provided none. No details, no name, just a matter-of-fact statement, as if sharing her new yoga class schedule. My voice dropped to a near whisper. "What about Dad?" She exhaled sharply, almost as though her annoyance was unavoidable. "This has nothing to do with him," she insisted coolly. I clenched my jaw in silent rage. The man she had been married to for nearly 2 decades, the man who still loved her despite everything, was now being carelessly dismissed. I wanted to scream at her, to shout how selfish and destructive her choices were. Yet I kept quiet. I sat there gripping a pen until my knuckles went white, stomach roiling with a visceral sense of betrayal. For weeks after that, Mom didn't just inflict betrayal on Dad. She systematically dismantled him. She spread a narrative that painted my father as controlling and emotionally abusive. Though none of it was true, she was so persuasive that even our extended family began to buy into her twisted version of events. Then came the day everything turned to ice. I arrived home from school, tossing my backpack on the couch, expecting to hear Dad in the kitchen or see him balancing bills at the table. Instead, a strange silence hung over the house. The front door, slightly ajar and swaying in the gentle breeze, sent a shudder through me. "Dad?" I called out, but no answer came. The oppressive silence pressed in until our neighbor's soft knock provided the first clue. "I saw the police here earlier," she murmured uneasily. "They took your dad." I blinked in disbelief. Dad arrested? It seemed impossible. He wasn't a criminal, yet the look on our neighbor's face told me otherwise. The rest of the afternoon I paced around in terror, each thought darker than the last. Later that evening, when Mom finally returned home, I discovered the grim truth. She was in the living room, phone pressed to her ear, laughing. Yes, laughing, as if nothing was amiss. Hidden in the hushed sounds, I could hear her recounting, "Yeah, I finally did it. I filed the report this morning, and they picked him up this afternoon." After a pause, her tone turned matter-of-fact enough to churn my stomach even further. "Of course, I told them he hit me. What else could I say?" The ground seemed to vanish beneath me. My breath hitched as I stepped forward, voice trembling. "You lied." Without any shock or surprise, she smiled, the kind of smile reserved for those who've grown comfortable in their deception. "Logan, honey, you don't understand," she said. "It's complicated." Complicated indeed. Complicated enough that Dad ended up enduring weeks behind bars before being released on bail. But by then, the damage was done. Local news had smeared his name, and his employer had terminated him the moment he walked out of jail. Friends once steadfast began avoiding him, and the world had already cast its verdict against him, while Mom portrayed herself as the victim. I still remember the day we packed up the few belongings my dad had left. He silently went through the motions, as if watching someone else's life collapse. Renting a tiny apartment on the other side of town, his new life was nothing more than a cramped, single room. I wanted to be with him, but custody was granted exclusively to Mom. Even worse, I was never allowed to tell my side of the story in court. Whenever I attempted to speak up, I was dismissed, with the excuse that I was too young to understand, that Mom needed protection. Living with her became unbearable. She wasn't acting like a caring mother anymore, but more like a puppet master orchestrating her own narrative. If I ever dared mention Dad's name, she would cut me off instantly. "You don't understand what he put you through." In those moments, I harbored a seething hatred, a silent fury reserved for someone who had dismantled our family. Meanwhile, Dad was barely clinging to life. He sent me texts every few days, always trying to be upbeat. "Hope you're doing okay, kiddo. Love you." But the words rang hollow. Every time I visited him, his tired, gaunt figure seemed to diminish further, the weight of his shattered world pressing down on him. His apartment mirrored his despair, almost empty, with a lone mattress on the floor, a couple of thrift store chairs, and a shaky little table. The refrigerator was nearly bare, and his clothes drooped in the closet as if mourning the man he once was. One evening, as I sat on the mattress next to him, I finally asked, "Are you okay, Dad?" He mustered a smile, but it never reached his eyes. "Yeah, bud. Just trying to figure things out." My voice dropped even lower. "But you don't have to pretend with me." He sighed, running a hand down his face. "I just don't know how to fix this, Logan." In that moment, I wished I could do something, anything to set things right. But he patted my shoulder and forced another smile. "Don't worry about me. Just focus on school," he said. I nodded, though the heaviness in my chest lingered. Then one Saturday morning, everything crumbled. It was one of those rare, lazy Saturday mornings when I planned to spend the afternoon at a friend's house. Mom, as usual, was lost in her phone, barely glancing up as I mentioned my plans. I hadn't spoken much with Dad in recent days, and I assumed he needed his space. When I returned home that evening, the house was eerily silent. No TV hum, no clattering dishes. A small envelope lay on the kitchen counter, bearing my name in Dad's handwriting. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The paper felt fragile, as if it might disintegrate between my fingers. I unfolded the letter and began reading, my breath catching at every word. "Logan, I'm sorry." That single apology marked the beginning of the end. Dad poured his love and pride onto the page, confessing his regrets and admitting that, despite all he'd done for our family, nothing was ever enough for Mom. He recounted the systematic way she had worn him down, how she drained our savings, tarnished his reputation, and ultimately, how those lies left him with nothing. In his shaky handwriting, he pleaded with me not to succumb to hatred, urging me instead to hold on to his love despite the betrayal. I clutched the letter as if it were my only lifeline, tears streaming down my face as I whispered that I couldn't possibly not resent her. I tried calling him immediately, over and over, but his phone went straight to voicemail. The fear that had been lurking in my gut turned into a full-blown dread. An hour later, a knock on the door sent me racing to answer it. Standing there was a police officer with a steady yet somber expression. "Is your mother home?" he asked. I replied, "She's in the living room." The officer stepped in and then called out to her. Mom glanced up briefly, annoyance and indifference mixing in her eyes. The officer's next words made my heart sink. "I'm very sorry, but your husband was found in his apartment earlier today. He took his own life." My ears rang, and the room suddenly felt too small, suffocating me. No, he wouldn't," I choked out, my knees threatening to give in. The officer moved closer as if to steady me, but my body was numb. To my astonishment, Mom's face reflected not shock, but a measured surprise, as though this tragic turn was merely an inconvenient disruption to her day. "I never thought he'd actually go through with it," she murmured, before reaching for her phone and dialing a number without missing a beat. Something inside me finally snapped. I wanted to scream, to grab that phone from her hands and force her to feel even a fraction of the devastation I was drowning in. But I couldn't. Instead, I retreated to my room, closed the door, and slid to the floor clutching Dad's letter. Those words were all that tethered me to a reality that had been completely shattered. The funeral was small and painfully quiet, so much so that it felt like the weight of the world was pressing on my chest. Most who attended did so out of obligation, their sympathy as hollow as their pity. Dad's name had been smeared beyond recognition, and even his closest friends seemed too fearful to pay him homage. Meanwhile, Mom played the grieving widow with unnerving precision, tears falling on cue, accepting condolences with a performance that was more rehearsed than heartfelt. I stood there detached, watching as the man I had once idolized was reduced to a casket while the woman who ruined him maintained her icy composure. In the days that followed, my raw grief slowly curdled into deep-seated anger. Mom carried on with her life as if nothing had happened, heading to work, spending time with her secret partner, and occasionally uttering hollow platitudes about moving on. "We have to keep living, Logan," she'd say one evening as she set her purse on the counter. "Your father wouldn't want you stuck in the past." I clenched my jaw. "You don't get to decide what Dad would have wanted," I thought bitterly. Her words stung, as if dismissing my pain so casually could erase all that he had lost. Then one day something inside me shifted. I scanned Dad's letter into my computer and spent hours pouring out every truth I'd been forced to swallow, along with the lies. I sent a long email to everyone. I mean everyone. Family members, close family friends, even some of Mom's coworkers. I didn't care about the fallout. I just needed the truth to be known. Responses flooded in within hours. Mom's phone buzzed off the hook, and I could hear her, voice rising in panic as she fumbled with damage control. "No, you haven't got it right," she snapped into the phone. "He was unstable. I'm not going to defend myself against these accusations." I couldn't help but let a bitter smile cross my face. At last, she had lost control over the narrative. Her own relatives, once loyal, turned against her, and friends who once supported her began disappearing from her life. Soon after, she even lost her job. Someone had forwarded my email to her boss, and that was the final nail in her coffin. I watched it all unfold with a quiet, grim satisfaction, knowing that for once the real truth was coming to light. Life under her roof remained a constant battle. As a minor forced to share a home with the woman who had unraveled our family, I felt trapped. Every interaction with her was a reminder of everything lost. "Miss a chore, come home late," she'd lash out with sharp, cutting remarks. "I have enough on my plate without you making things harder," she snapped one night when I carelessly left my backpack on the kitchen table. I'd counter quietly, "Maybe you should focus on fixing your own mess instead of nitpicking mine." Her face would darken, but she never pursued the argument. A silent war waged with barbed comments and resentful glares. It wasn't long before Mom started surrounding herself with men who made my skin crawl. They were rough-edged with dead eyes behind their cheap cologne and clumsy smiles, and they exuded a smell of booze and trouble. I learned to escape, locking myself in my room or leaving the house altogether whenever they came over. One night, she even brought two men home. I barely spared them a glance as I grabbed my hoodie and left, wandering the streets aimlessly, heart numb and mind blank, until the moment I could return without witnessing that chaos. When I finally stepped back inside, the overt stench of sweat, alcohol, and a chemical tang hit me like a punch. The living room was in total disarray. White powder scattered on the coffee table, a folded dollar bill beside it, an empty vodka bottle lying on its side with its contents seeping into the carpet, and on the floor, evidence of a night gone wrong. I gripped my fist tightly, determined to keep moving despite the familiarity of it all. And then I saw her, Mom, lying face down, motionless on the floor. For a heartbeat, I believed she was merely passed out, as she often was, until I noticed the pool of vomit under her cheek and the shallow rise and fall of her chest. It was clear she had overdosed. Instinctively, I rushed to her side, kneeling and gently turning her over. Her skin was ashen, lips slightly parted, and her eyes flickered open in a haze of confusion and fear. She tried to speak, but all that emerged was a feeble gurgle. In a desperate motion, she reached weakly toward the coffee table and her phone, as if beckoning me to seek help. I stepped back, unable to move or speak, as she gasped for air, her fingers twitching one last time to point at that lifeline. For 3 agonizing minutes, she struggled against the inevitable until her body went limp. I sat there, paralyzed by the choice I was forced to make, until after what felt like an eternity of silence, I finally picked up the phone and dialed 911. When the paramedics arrived, they pronounced her dead. I won't dwell on her funeral. It was as empty and unremarkable as her performance of grief. I was nearly 18 by then, and the court allowed me to remain in the home we'd shared, no matter how haunted it felt. I juggled 2 jobs to keep the lights on, ensuring the fridge had food, and for the sake of my future, I refused to let our tormented past define me. After graduation, I landed a job as an accountant at a local used car dealership. It wasn't glamorous, but numbers made sense. They're predictable, they don't lie, and they never destroy lives for their own selfish sake. I've never dated because after everything I've experienced, the betrayal, the darkness, the idea of letting someone intimate into my life feels utterly impossible. Trust once shattered leaves a mark too deep to mend. I rarely speak of what happened with Mom, neither to friends nor strangers. The memories haunt the dead hours of night, when silence brings visions of her face. lips parted, fingers twitching toward that forbidden phone. Yet these nightmares do not stir guilt or regret. My heart remains steady. Sometimes I even think of visiting her grave just to symbolically mark the end of her reign over my life. But I know better. Just a few steps away lies my father's memory, a man who, despite everything, did not deserve such a fate. This is my life, and I've chosen it to be lived alone. Dear listeners, if this story resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that delve deep into the human experience. Thank you for listening.